Let me introduce our speaker today, who's Reverend Thom Muller and a pastor in the Swedenborgian Church. I'm sure you saw on our newsletter that he's the pastor of the El Cerrito Church, Church on the Hill, and that's just right outside of San Francisco for those of you who are just very East Coast focused, um, just north of San Francisco. And he's been there quite a bit and has really brought new energy, and I'll say young energy to it. Um, One thing that I was just talking to him before we started, which I find very interesting. Thom and I both are on the general council, that's the governing board of the denomination, so we get to hear what's going on with each other's lives a little bit. And one of the things he does is a nighttime ministry in the city of San Francisco. And he's been doing that for years. He started that when he was a student and he stuck with it. And if you think about it, going out at night, right, at the darkest time, when some of the people are at the greatest need. So I'm just so impressed with that he does that, and he's has shared stories about that. And I'm thrilled about his topic today about mysticism because many of you know when I'm asked about what our church believes, I always my quick elevator pitch line is I always say, well, yeah, we're a Christian church with a more mystic focused. Now, some Swedenborgians don't like that. I love it. It's it always leads to an intriguing conversation because everybody's like, well, what is that? What is a mystic? Well, we're going to find out today in Thom's sermon. So, Thom, thank you so much for joining us for a second service for you today and sharing your wisdom with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Like Rich mentioned, it's one of the nice things about being on General Council is you kind of hear a lot of updates about what's going on with the denomination. So it's been really nice to see you guys and the exciting developments there. So I was just telling Rich I'm excited to see the space in person in November. So really looking forward to that. Um, I don't know. Should I just sort of go ahead with the message? Yeah? Sweet. I'll try to keep my rambling somewhat at a minimum. Can everyone hear me all right? Sweet. Well, this was actually kind of the perfect intro, Rich, because, one of the things I found is that consistently, if you Google Swedenborg or you find out about Swedenborg, one of the terms that you immediately will notice is mystic. Swedenborg was a scientist and mystic. Swedenborg was a scientist and mystic and theologian. Swedenborg was a Christian mystic, etc., etc. And of course, that then begs the question, what is a mystic? What is mysticism? And what is the specific kind of Christian mysticism that Swedenborg promoted and lived, arguably? When some people hear the term mysticism, sometimes they think of kind of a hermit-like figure, having trance states and, perhaps seeing into other realms, states of cataclysmic ecstasy and vivid visions of transcendental realms, etc., etc. And some people think of mysticism as some kind of really abstract, perhaps even secret, unattainable, or reserved for saints and sages or some kind of spiritual elite. And they look at folks like Swedenborg, one of many wonderful mystics throughout world traditions, and certainly acknowledged as such. People look at people like Swedenborg and think of them as these very special, unique, chosen people. And of course, there's something to that. But sometimes we tend to remove the term mysticism from our day to day living, from a relatable, active kind of spirituality. Yet when I'm talking about mysticism today in our discussion, I'm talking about something that by its very nature addresses the very core of the human experience. The way I understand it, mysticism is not something reserved for a few, but is something that is our birthright, our inheritance as children of God. Now, the Oxford English Dictionary defines mysticism as, and this is only one of many, many definitions. If you talk to a religious scholar, they will give you a different definition, etc., etc., etc. But to kind of go back to sort of commonly accepted standards, the Oxford Dictionary defines mysticism as a belief that union with or absorption into the deity or the absolute or the spiritual apprehension of knowledge inaccessible to the intellect may be attained through contemplation and self-surrender. Now, again, depending on who you ask, a scholar, a theologian, a anthropologist, a philosopher, they all might give you different definitions of what they really understand mysticism to be, but the one unifying characteristic that seems to be universally identified with mysticism is a direct experience of the divine. And much of organized religion has tried to minimize mysticism for that very reason. The notion that a direct experience of ultimate divine reality, not mediated through some kind of external structure or organization or institution or orthodoxy or tradition or some specific sacrament or ritual, the notion that this kind of experience is available to all of us. That, of course, threatens the very core of a lot of institutionalized exoteric religion. If one group or organization holds the key to heaven, it's very easy for that organization to control others. The ultimate mystic in the Western tradition, I would argue, is Jesus of Nazareth. And we all know what happened to that dude when he questioned the establishment of the day. And mystics like Swedenborg believe that the salvific path that was modeled by Christ is not simply something to believe in, and much less some kind of worldly institution to submit to. Not a ransom blood sacrificed for alleged sinfulness to accept, but a model of God realization. The true church, Swedenborg claims, is within and exists independently from structures and organizations or particulars of doctrine. In Heaven and Hell 56, he writes, "The church is within us and not outside us, and every person in whom the Lord is present in the goodness of love and truth is a church." Yet I don't say this to be disrespectful to organized institutional religion. I obviously am kind of a fan to some degree, and I believe many of us are. There's a lot of beautiful things about religious institution. To the contrary, it served at times as a vessel of true mysticism and as a guardian of sacred texts and traditions, etc., etc. Swedenborg actually, it's just a little fun Swedenborg fact. Swedenborg attended church services fairly regular, even into his older days, after having basically completely rejected the theology of the Church of Sweden and the Church of England. But he continued to attend the sacraments because he believed that even um, that sacred ritual, the meaning of it, and spiritual community have extreme value. And it's kind of hilarious because he said it would be difficult for him to sit through the sermons because all of the angels would be debating and would be, pointing out how false the theology of the preacher was. Just, I thought it was a very cute, very Swedenborg thing to experience. The reason I'm so blunt about the whole institutionalized Christianity is that I think it's easy to confuse Christianity with Christendom. And while the latter can be a vessel and aid for the former, it can never be the former because Christianity is not an institution. But if you believe in mystical Christianity, is a personal experience. As we kind of alluded to a little bit already. Swedenborg writes in True Christianity, this is TCR 89. The Lord's life followed the path it did because the divine design is for people to prepare themselves to accept God. And as they prepare themselves, God enters them as if he were coming into his own dwelling and his own home. That is mysticism par excellence. A journey of reunion with the ultimate, of direct unitive experience of the divine, independent from a specific human institution. And he believed that this Christ path, this path of regeneration, the divining of the human, is something that to some degree all of us can go through as in our process of regeneration, regardless, of course, of our specific religion or culture or tradition. The Christ path is truly universal, and it's a path that can be walked by the Christian and the Buddhist and the Hindu and the Jew alike. The Christ path is a path of union with God by means of a lived, direct embodiment of God's qualities, namely love, wisdom, compassion, understanding. And all of us, if we look at that as a definition of mysticism, all of us are designed to be mystics in the truest sense of the word. As Swedenborg writes in Divine Love and Wisdom 170, the grand purpose of all of creation is that there would be an eternal union of the creator with the created universe. And I'm going to finish my remarks and then we can, I know we'll have some opportunity for discussion. I'm going to finish my remarks with a quote that I came across. This is from Rolf Lewis. He's a Rosicrucian teacher. And I thought it was really fitting for what we're discussing today. So he wrote, "If you would know a mystic, do not confine your search to the monasteries and temples, but look also on the highways and byways, in towns, hamlets, and in the hustle and bustle of the great cosmopolitan centers of the world. When you find someone who is industrious, studious, compassionate, loved by friends and neighbors, tolerant in religious views, and who can point out to you the magnificence and efficacy of God in the simplest things, you have found a mystic. With these qualities, whether one is attired in a sacerdotal robe or the overalls of a mechanic, one is nonetheless a mystic." And I will leave it at that in terms of my sort of initial remarks.
Thank you, Tom. That was beautiful. I am so grateful to hear that message. The mysticism is, I would say, my favorite part of all this. So to hear someone express it and talk about it was really awesome. But
Thank
I'm
you.
we do open it up for questions, and I have a couple, but I want, as others are thinking about it, if you just raise your hand, we'll get you in the queue here. Um, and we also have other pastors who join in. Um, I will say that some of the members have said they've really enjoyed when pastors comment too, and they appreciate the discussion, that the insights of other ministers. So that's so thank you, other pastors, for being here too. But here's my question. Uh, the only thing I didn't like about your message was I've tried to convince this congregation that if they don't come to church and don't give money, they won't get into heaven. So that kind of undermines the entire mission of Church of the Holy City. No, I'm only kidding. No, no. The what I really liked about it does raise a question. You are a pastor of a church. I'm a pastor of a church. What is the role of the church in 2025 and onward in incubating, welcoming, cultivating attendees, seekers who come and go, their direct connection with the divine? What is the church's role? Because it's not like I was joking, but the church did that for years, did scare people like if you don't go to church, you're going to hell. If you don't give money, you're going to hell. If you don't say these words, you're going to hell. So that's obviously coercion and no free will and not love. Okay, we get that. But what is the role? And you mentioned, Swedenborg went to church and he sounded like he was a little bored. Maybe it wasn't his thing. what do you in your ministry, you're thinking about this because you get this mystical aspect and you're welcoming seekers. So I'm just curious, um, what's the role of the church in being and our church particularly being a mystic church?
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that. Um, I was talking to Sage Cole a couple of weeks ago, and we had a similar conversation. This is obviously a question that comes up, and it's, I think, a really healthy thing that we're a tradition that was started, inspired by someone who never started a religion, right? Or a church or anything like that. So there's that inherent paradox, which I think is actually kind of healthy. But Sage was I was talking to Sage about Helen Keller and what Helen Keller might be saying to us. And her response was that Helen Keller actually at a convention, Swedenborgian convention, said that we ought uh, uh, to not value the vessel more than the treasure, right? Um, And so, what is the vessel and what is the treasure? I think the point really that she's making and that Swedenborg is making is not that church and much less spiritual community is obsolete, but that people acknowledge that it's a means towards the end, and the end is regeneration, right? So I think Rich put it beautifully. Like if we can get to a point where we have a genuine format for people to support each other in their spiritual growth as individuals, we can kind of shift that back where we maybe no longer are attached to specific forms, but we find ways to really get into that inner church and cultivating that together. So I don't think it's an either or, I think it's we'll rediscover the beauty of institutionalized stuff because we realize the end goal, and that that the vessel is in fact a vessel and not the treasure, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, you're saying it's just it's practical. It meets
Yeah.
the need of people, and it just wherever they are. I love that. I see that Robert McCluskey has his hand. Pastor McCluskey, if you would.
I sure do. Thank you very much. Hi, Tom.
Robert, good to see
Can
you,
you hear
man.
me? Okay, good, good. There's a lot here, and of course, my first comment following what Rich has picked up on is that everything's got its proper role in life, and the institution, if there wasn't an institution of Swedenborgianism, I'm not sure what I'd be doing right now, but wandering around, bouncing into the walls. So it's got its place, as you were just suggesting. But in terms of everyday mysticism, I'm intrigued. One of my favorite passages, and I'm going to read it to you, it's not too long, is from the Heavenly Secrets, Secrets of Heaven, number 69. So it comes early on. And I want to read this to you because, and also to remember that one of the roots of the word mystic is to close one's eyes. Swedenborg says, we were so created by the Lord as to be able, while living in the body, to speak with spirits and angels, as in fact was done in ancient times. For being a spirit clothed with the body, we are one with them. But because in the process of time we so immersed ourselves in corporeal and worldly things, outwardly things, as to care almost nothing for angels besides anything else, the way was closed. Yet as soon as the corporeal things recede in which we are immersed, the way is again opened, and we are among spirits and in common life with them. So just a little reminder about mysticism not being so, again, it's kind of really spacey, new age, kind of esoteric and hard to understand or to get involved in. It's really our natural way of living, and it's happening all the time, whether we pay attention to it or not. And so, coming back to full circle, if the church does anything, it's our statement of purpose. It's been around for many decades, is to facilitate the spiritual well-being of people in the course of their regeneration, and that, as Tom pointed out, involves opening up to these deeper levels within ourselves that everybody has, and living a very heavenly life as a result. And so I want to thank you. I'll also have to leave early today, but not right now. But thank you for letting me hold forth and share my 4 cents. And I also really like that tapestry behind you, Tom. I wonder what that's about.
You would. Thanks, Robert.
Okay.
Well, I like the way that Robert reframed it, that we are spiritual beings in a physical body that are always connected, but over time we've lost the connection. So the more you get out of this physical world and the day to day, you can open yourself up. That's
And,
really a
and not just historically over the long haul, but even we start out as little children, little babies, very mystically oriented without the ability to fully understand, grasp, or express it. And before long, we are orienting ourselves outwardly and materialistically in terms of the body, and we fall away from that original uh, presence of the divine.
thank you. And I think that's also why little kids often see things and they're like, oh, they got imaginary friends. Um, anybody else with a question on today's message or comment?
I see Robin and Malcolm.
Yes, go ahead.
Robin, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So I have a question. So, how do you get your congregation interested in doing things like meditation and contemplation? I mean, we've had uh, meditation groups at our church. Even within the actual service, we have people who I just don't do that. They just are so reluctant. And we talk a lot about what you're talking about, different ways and techniques to have some kind of union with the divine, or some to spend some kind of time with the divine. But it's either a lack of interest or a lack of people making it fit into their schedule. So, do you have any suggestions on that?
Yeah, it's good to see you, Robin. Um,
You see,
yeah, that's a rough one. I think it's something we all have in common is, uh, by us, I mean people that are interested in more of an inner path, right? It's not something that a lot of people are sort of intuitively drawn to these days. What comes up for me in response to what you're sharing is uh, one of the beauties of the Swedenborgian approach being that there isn't one right way, and there isn't one right practice or anything like that, right? So, it's kind of like I think of people who, for example, really don't want to meditate, you know. It's like maybe there's something that fits with them in a different way, that speaks to them more directly. And figuring out what that is obviously is hard, especially when you're a spiritual community where people have different needs and different ideas, right? But just sort of sitting with that reality that, what we do together is in order to cultivate and support each other in our own spiritual path and really, yeah, sort of that fine line between getting people interested and being having the initiative without imposing something. That's really difficult. Yeah, I know that experience. And I don't have an easy solution to it either.
Let's
But
just
thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say I agree. Everybody's different. What we often just do is just ask people like how they engage, like what they do.
Mhm.
And so people have said things I wouldn't think of gardening, for example. That's just not my thing. But I can't now tell you the number of people who've talked about gardening, or the people who've talked about spending time with their pets, or the people who go for hikes and walks. Um, and now I would say among the younger crowd, I'm hearing much more about breath work than I've ever heard before. So there was kind of a mindfulness phase. I think that maybe we've passed through it already, but that was kind of in the business world. So, and also something that I would say most of my life very unfamiliar with is psychedelics. And the number of young people who've told me like the whole reason I'm on a God path now is because of psychedelic. So I kind of grew up with a very, very negative view of drugs. And yeah, particularly around with addiction and so forth. So I think people are doing different things, and it might not just be like meditating in church, but then other friends in our community, like Annabelle, organizes a meditation group in her yoga barn, and has a group of people that show up. And it's not church, so it may just be that people aren't maybe church people who have been raised in the church with a certain rhyme and rhythm of like this is the hymn, this is the psalm, this is the responsive reading, this is where you stand, this is where you sit, this is the offering, and they're used to that. That's probably their meditation, like that's the rhyme and reason. That sounds like the meditation might sound new age or something. Just doesn't fit with what they were raised with. But I find younger folks seem to be open to all different ways to get into it and are all looking for that.
Absolutely.
I wonder if you'd agree with the thought that the mystic impulse is universal. The Middle East has been my area of focus throughout my life, and certainly Sufism plays a very important role within Islam, and indeed it has attracted many non-Muslims. And from my limited knowledge of the Far East, the Eastern traditions would also seem to embody significant mystical impulse. It would seem to be pretty well established within our intellectual and emotional DNA. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And, I think you point out something really important about mysticism that people point out when they study comparative mysticism is that, every religion, every world religion has an exoteric and an esoteric side to it. And there's mystical traditions in all world religions. And the fascinating thing is, it seems that the more you go into that realm, the more they all harmonize with each other. There's a quote that is misattributed to Meister Eckhart that says, "Theologians may quarrel, but mystics all speak the same language." And I think there's something to that.
Yeah, we did an event with Rumi Forum, which is obviously a Muslim Sufi group in DC, and we did Rumi and Swedenborg, and it,
Nice.
it was uncanny, the connection. And I feel like we're more connected. I feel more connected to a Sufi or maybe even Kabbalah, though I don't completely understand Kabbalah. But I tend to be more connected to them than I would say to different types of Christians, where I don't feel a connection as much. So I like that question from Malcolm about the universality of it. Can you define the words that you use, esoteric and extraterritoric? I'm familiar with
Yeah.
esoteric. Yeah, can you define those?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's another one of those things where people have different definitions, right? But the notion that, if we say look at even just the example of Christianity, right? There would be the exoteric, meaning outward.
Mhm.
And outward doesn't mean like, fake or anything like that. It just means things like structures or set belief systems or schools of thought that are sort of quote unquote for the masses, right? And then on the other hand, you would have an esoteric strain within Christianity that focuses on inner experience and that focuses on, for example, classic example with Swedenborg, looking at scripture not as a something external, time and space based, but something that is talking about our own inner experience. Right. So that's kind of like there's outward focused religion and there's inward focused religion. And of course, a lot of times they intersect, but that's kind of broadly, the outer versus inner kind of dynamic.
And if I can, Professor, if I can ask another question on that same line, with the a lot of people describe Swedenborg and Swedenborgianism as esoteric, and you were kind of giving an example there. But what do they mean when they say that Swedenborgians are esoteric? Because it sounds, on the surface, it sounds like it's a mystery religion or something like that, and it's kind of spooky and
Yeah.
unknown. There's certain handshakes and certain cards they hand out and certain ways to meet. But why do people say Swedenborgians are esoteric?
Yeah, I think that's sort of the second dimension to it that I think sort of, especially in sort of the popular vernacular is really common, is when people look at the dichotomy of esoteric versus exoteric, and what is esoteric means it's something inner, meaning it's something that arguably is reserved to a few, right? So some people have the notion that, well, if something is esoteric, that means it's this inner circle of people that is somehow hidden, you know? And Swedenborgianism certainly doesn't fit that in terms of, we're not a secret organization. We're not, within that. So that's sort of that that common concept of something esoteric is something hidden. Um, but I think if we use it in the true sense of something that is inward focused, not hidden from others, but inward focused, I think in that sense, and that's generally how it's used. Like if you look at the Western esoteric tradition, Swedenborg is a big name in that.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it does have culturally that connotation of secrecy or selectness, which, yeah, it's certainly not something we necessarily uh, want to promulgate. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Now that you mention it, Tom, whenever I introduce, I'm a minister, I'm Swedenborgian, generally people are like, I never heard of that. What is that? So I have to answer that question maybe a gajillion times a week, whatever I'm doing. I think in the future, I'm just going to answer, oh, don't worry if you don't know about it. It's esoteric.
There you go.
Come talk to me later about it. I can't talk about it now. That would probably make it more interesting. Um,
Yeah.
and
Quick follow-up on that.
yeah,
Esoteric, in my understanding, is it means inner circle, and exoteric is outside the circle. And there is a very positive meaning to esoteric. People say, "Oh, esoteric, I'm not allowed in," or some people say, "Oh, I'm esoteric, I'm on the inside." But when I take my car into the shop, these guys are esoteric. I open up that hood, I wouldn't know where to turn or what to do. These guys know, because they have been initiated. And that's another concept that is associated with esoteric, is that this is a group of people who have gone through a process and have achieved a certain level of understanding or maturity, let's say, and can, for instance, teach others or provide something, on a higher level, because they have been initiated into a deeper or higher truth, whereas not everybody has. So it's not really who's in and who's out, the different clubs and cliques that can emerge. But it's just a comment on the process that all of us can enter into and the progress we can make spiritually.
thank you for that.
Okay.
Love that. And then, that really ties into, I mean, those terms esotericism and mysticism, are sometimes used interchangeably. And both of them have that characteristic that I kind of alluded to earlier, that people think of it as something that is somehow extraordinary or removed from the normal experience. Whereas I think Swedenborgianism invites us to kind of rethink that and kind of, discover the inner aspects of this stuff. So, yeah,
Yeah,
thanks for really.
we have time for one last question from our most esoteric member, Jose or Katie.
Yeah, it was Jose. I guess the question I wanted to ask is, uh, people tend to think of mysticism or esotericism as practices that are kind of inherently um, uh, done by with by oneself, that they're I'm blanking out on the word I'm actually looking for, but solitary, that they're very about solitary study. But you mentioned how and I loved your remarks, by the way. You mentioned in them the story about how Swedenborg used to himself go to church because he thought that something about the ritual was helpful for him to be part of a group, even while in his own head he was hearing angels debating the validity of a sermon. But like the fact is that he thought that even he thought that there was an aspect of his own mystical study, if you will, that did require being with other people, even if it wasn't directly confronting them in a sense. I'm wondering what you think are other kinds of activities? What are activities that Swedenborg himself, or that you or Rich that you would advise, other than, of course, showing up at Church of the Holy City and feeding that collection plate? What are things that we should be doing to help in our own spiritual journeys? You mentioned Rosicrucians. So there are other groups that exist to kind of foster that kind of development. I wonder if you could just expand on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that. Thank you. Something that comes up for me is that uh, Swedenborgian mysticism, if we look at mysticism as the idea of a union with God, and we do have to be fair that a lot of forms of mysticism, particularly in the Western world, have an aspect of, oh, live a solitary life, live a celibate life, remove yourself from the earth. And that's how you enter union with God. And Swedenborg flips that completely around, where he says, yes, it's a very intimate inner experience of union with God. And the way to achieve that union is by loving other people and by being a truth seeker for the sake of truth and being honest, right? And then when it comes to particular practices, again, the beauty, I think, of the Swedenborgian approach is that whatever gets you there, right, whatever leads you to a life that is a life of regeneration, aka union with God, is whatever makes you a kinder, more truthful person, right? And for some person that may be yoga, another person that may be contemplation, another person that may be an initiatory system of some sort, and to really listen to our angelic self and our soul to see what do I need, what feeds me in that regenerative journey, and just to really encourage ourselves to walk our own path there while supporting each other in community, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I love that, Tom, and I think that's a great question, Jose. I would only add that um, my understanding is that Swedenborg himself was attending parliament and advising kings and royalty and doing all kinds of political activities as he's having these at different times of the day, obviously, but sometimes I guess they crisscrossed, but he's having these deep, deep spiritual connections. And so, Jose, I would say working in the federal government might actually be might be could be a very mystical path because you of the spiritual challenges you have, the responsibilities to make ethical choices. So I think I think he does flip the idea that this is like you do this only in silence and pulling yourself out of the world, and says put yourself into the world because that's where you're going to be challenged with other human beings. You're going to have to forgive people, and you're going to have to meet people you don't like, and share and all that. So maybe that's a way to it.
Very quickly, Swedenborg has a whole chapter on heaven and hell titled "The life that leads to heaven is not a life of withdrawal from the world, but a life in the world." It's the title chapter of the title of the chapter, and then he goes on. So it's right there for anybody interested.
Well, this was a very esoteric and mystical discussion. Thank you, Tom, for taking us there.
Thank you.
Really appreciate the discussion that you fostered with us. And thank you all for everyone who participated in the discussion and all those who listened and took things away from it. So thank you for that. We're going to wrap this part up.